Well, let's start with the good news. The good news is that the Earth didn't die in the early part of the 21st century, but when the end time came, it was worse than we imagined. Today on the Comic Book Report, Fantastic Four by Millar and Bryan Hitch Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings all, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm happy to say I'm diving back into the world of my favorite Fantastic family. Of course, we're talking today about the Fantastic Four Millar Hitch run. You know, I've been hearing a lot of mixed reviews about this book, but I'm happy to say I really enjoyed it. Cannot wait to review it for you all today, but before we do, I just want to shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up comic book collected editions, please check out their website. You can even use my code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate code or the link in the description to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission. It's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Mark Millar and illustrated primarily by Bryan Hitch. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2008. This volume collects Fantastic Four issues 554 through 569 and Annual 32, along with Fantastic Force issues 1 through 4 and Marvel 1985 issues 1 through 6. And finally, this oversized hardcover edition comes in at 784 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Fantastic Four Omnibus that came out recently from Marvel Comics. You might notice that this is actually a direct market cover for this omnibus. I'll go ahead and throw up a picture of the standard edition cover that you can find for this book so you can compare. Please note as well that my direct market spine has a little picture of Dr. Doom in the bottom section. I believe the standard edition has a picture of the Fantastic Four characters in that bottom section of the spine. I think both covers are really great. I think that there's something to love about each of the cover arts. For the direct market, I do like that we have kind of an action shot of all of our heroes using their powers. Very fun. Even on the back cover, the art is just gorgeous, a really good indication of Hitch's style that you see throughout. And now I'm going to take a minute to do one more look at that dust jacket in greater detail, including the interior flaps, before transitioning to taking a look at the under the dust jacket artwork they print on the hardback book itself. I've always said it, I love that feature with new printed books. I feel like so many different companies are capitalizing on printing on the hardback itself. It's great, just bonus artwork. I think it's really stunning. This dust jacket, like I said, is the direct market cover. I really enjoy that, and as far as the under the dust jacket artwork for this book, well, frankly, this image has become one of my favorites for under the dust jacket artwork I have in my collection. It's a picture of a hooded figure in an old-looking library kind of study. It's just such an evocative image. It comes from like a very specific issue in this collection. I'll try not to spoil it here, but it's just really, really captivating. I really love this image. I feel like when I opened up this book and I saw that, I was intrigued and really excited to dive into this run. Very well done, Marvel. And now we'll take a look at the sewn binding for this omnibus. This omnibus has glossy paper stock, and the sewn binding I thought was perfectly lovely. I had no problems with it myself. This is on the smaller end for a Marvel omnibus, but I really liked it. I had no problems. There is moments of gutter loss that you'll see throughout the video, but I really had no problem. Great book. And without any further ado, let's dive into the collection proper. I will say the title page, early couple pages are all really standard information. We have kind of a mapped version of a table of contents, I like to call it, where we have the creator breakdown on the different issues in the book or collections of issues where pertinent. We don't really have page numbers in this modern omnibus, unfortunately, but you can get a sense of the flow of the book, where the issues are placed, and which creative teams are behind the issues. I think that this is a really great feature because this is the Mark Millar and Bryan Hitch Omnibus, because the Fantastic Four run we get in this book is by those two creators. However, we also have a 4-issue miniseries, Fantastic Force, which is actually not created by Mark Millar or Bryan Hitch, but the storyline is heavily inspired by one of the main story arcs from their run, so I think it's really cool that they threw that in this omnibus. It was definitely a welcome addition for me, who had never had the opportunity to read those particular issues. We also have a couple random issues that maybe have one of the creators or not the other one, and then the book actually ends with this kind of miniseries. It could stand alone as its own graphic novel, I'm sure, Marvel 1985, which is actually written by Mark Millar, but it doesn't have art from Bryan Hitch, and this series at the end to me is the most baffling because it has almost nothing to do with the Fantastic Four. That being said, I am so happy they threw this in the omnibus. The actual Fantastic Four run from Millar and Hitch is only about 15 or 16 issues, I believe, so it would have been a much smaller book. So padding it out with the Fantastic Force miniseries, as well as Marvel 1985, you're now starting to get into the territory of a full-fledged omnibus, albeit a bit of a smaller one. But I do really like the inclusion of all the stories we get. I think it makes sense, since this book is showcasing those creators, to throw in something like Marvel 1985, and to see that series with an oversized hardcover treatment, it's just really, really great. But more on that in a little bit. So that's really kind of the mapping and situation we have with this run. We dive in right into the numbered Fantastic Four run here. I do think that overall this is a great on-ramp for new readers. I don't think you need to know a ton about the backstories of the Fantastic Four or the continuity to really appreciate the stories that Millar and Hitch tell throughout their run, and I think that that's really great in a modern omnibus. I could say the same thing for a lot of the other modern runs I've read, like Jonathan Hickman's and what I've read of Mark Waid's. Both are also very new reader friendly, and so I think that that's a great example of an onboarding book, and I can say that here. I was drawn to this run because primarily I'm a fan of the Ultimates, which I also reviewed on my channel not too long ago, that was also created by Millar and Hitch. I knew that they had a Fantastic Four run, and I actually had the first trade paperback collection that included, I think, the first 4 or 5 issues of their run. I really loved that book when I read it maybe a decade ago, and I ended up selling it. You know, I always wanted to go back and finish their run, but I never really made the opportunity to do so. So when I heard this omnibus was coming out, I got really excited. This was finally my chance to finish this run, and I was floored. I think that I heard fairly mixed reviews about the quality of the content here, but I'm happy to say that my experience was overwhelmingly positive. I really enjoy the Fantastic Four, and I think that this was a great portrayal and showcasing of these characters in some really fun science fiction superheroic adventures. I highly recommend it even from the jump, but I'm excited to dive into the review itself a little bit more. As far as the storylines go for the main Fantastic Four run we have in this book, there's maybe 4 or 5 main storylines that are all a few issues each. And I think that I really liked that breakup. There wasn't as much of a grand master story or narrative. I think the stories fed nicely into each other. There was a bit of a build-up and payoff, but overall, these are all, basically 4 to 5 separate stories across handfuls of issues, and it was really fun. It made the storytelling feel a little bit more episodic rather than this gigantic epic scoped adventure, kind of like Jonathan Hickman's run. And I think for me that actually ended up being more of a selling point, because I think that this is a great book you can pick up, read a handful of issues to get a complete story, put back on your shelf, and then revisit when you're ready for the next adventure. And I think that all the storylines were really interesting. Some of my favorites included the New World storyline, and that's really the story that kicks off this omnibus. It basically has an old flame or ex-girlfriend of Reed Richards from college show back up in the picture, inviting him to join kind of a think tank with a lot of different mystery, kind of clandestine feel to it. He goes there and finds that some of the world's richest politicians and financial industrialists have kind of funded this private fund to build kind of a pocket universe that has its own little world that's completely self-contained and pure, because they believe that our world is due for imminent, just natural disaster, ecological, environmental collapse, and that all the world will basically die. So they're trying to create this sort of second planet that the kind of elite can sort of populate, and they want Reed Richards to kind of assist to sort of create an arc for humanity when the environment kind of destroys the world. And so that's kind of the setup of that story arc. Reed sort of politely declines, believing that he can save this current Earth before it's too late, that it's not beyond saving. There's a bit of tension there. You get the feeling that there might be a bit of tension in the marriage between Reed Richards and Sue Storm, that his ex-girlfriend might be trying to provoke or kind of get her way in there. She's married to one of these industrialists, but the implication is that she's hoping to get back with Reed Richards. He seems to want to play it platonic. He's only interested in the science, and he kind of wants to get out of this sort of entangled situation. But we have within this new world kind of a crisis that's unleashed, that it ends up needing the help of the Fantastic Four to again save the day. The introduction of the New World as a setting and plot device was really important in this story, because there are subsequent stories, even within this omnibus, that refer back to it, and even though those are separate stories, it does feed in from this storyline, which was a lot of fun for me to see. I know Jonathan Hickman's run as well addresses New World, and I read that before reading this, so I had no idea some of the scope we have here. It makes me want to revisit some of those Hickman issues, but I think it was a really great entry storyline for this omnibus. This book also brings back Doctor Doom. Of course, we can't have a Fantastic Four omnibus without a Doctor Doom story, and this one was a ton of fun. Basically, Doomed is getting hunted by this weird group of powered individuals that appear to be from the future or perhaps somewhere else, and they all have different powers. Some of them are reminiscent to Fantastic Four abilities, and some are just different. Some are psychic, some are what have you. So it's a really interesting story where Doom's kind of being kidnapped, and they're trying to sort of find the kidnappers, figure out what's going on. Johnny Storm ends up getting entrapped and kidnapped as well, and we sort of find out that this group is in fact from the future, and they're from an Earth maybe 500 or 600 years down the line that is finally reaching that environmental collapse that they were worried about for New World. They were able to stave off this environmental apocalypse for hundreds of years due to the efforts of Reed Richards, so it's a really good tag from the previous storyline. But at any rate, we find out that these villains that kidnapped these characters are not really villains themselves. They're actually the last of Earth's heroes. They were known as the New Defenders, and they were basically tasked with finding a way to save the remnants of humanity from this future. And their idea was to actually send all the population of the future back to the past. I'm talking all 6 to 8 billion people, or however many are left. And their idea is that only a few of them could power the time machine to get them back into the past, and now they need more power to bring back everyone else. So they have a dead Galactus that they're trying to use as a battery, and somehow the Human Torch and Doctor Doom are a key ingredient with this battery, with Galactus, to power the time machine to bring everyone back to kind of save the future of humanity by bringing them to the past. This, of course, gets caught up with the Fantastic Four, especially when they're trying to find Doom and the Human Torch, and they're kind of reasoning that this will kind of doom the planet in the present if you bring that many people in all of a sudden. And there's sort of like an epic battle. We have some really interesting characters from the future. There's one that's kind of like the Human Torch. There's one sort of derivative of Ultron, who's now sort of a more humanoid android superhero. Thought that was a fun one. We have a psychic. We have this guy who's known as the Hooded Man for several issues, until this epic battle where we find out the Hooded Man is actually Wolverine. His claws come out in the middle of a battle, and you're just like, no way. We also have the leader of this group being none other than a future version of Sue Storm's Richards. It very, very fun storyline. Ultimately, this culminates with them bringing back everyone from the future to the present, but populating them into the new world that's completely empty and was saved for the world's elite, but is now saved to house the future of humanity. So this was a really fun storyline. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was really impressed in the way this felt like its own separate story, but it really tagged up with that first New World story arc. A ton of fun, and I thought it was a really rich idea creatively. I like the new team of sort of hero vigilante types that were introduced to us, and I think that it was just a lot of fun. We do have a really memorable issue as well where there's a funeral for the future Sue Storm, or Sue Richards, who actually dies at the hands of Doctor Doom. There's this entire funeral where even a watcher is present to see the proceedings, and Sue herself from present day gives her own eulogy. It's just a really interesting storyline. We have the hooded man from the future bumping into the Logan Wolverine of the present, just being like, "You gotta be kidding me," and the future Wolverine saying, "You don't want to know." I thought that this was just a really fun little wrinkle. I love that Wolverine ended up featuring so heavily into this collection. I would not have expected that, but between all this stuff with the Hooded Man and in future issues, it was a fun sequence of appearances by Wolverine, and I just really appreciate the introduction of that character, the Hooded Man, in this book. I should also note, part of that team is a Bruce Banner Jr., basically, the Hulk's son, who is basically a Hulk of the future. Anyway, a really great cast of characters there. There are a couple of other story arcs in this book that I want to draw attention to. After a lot of these events, we have the Fantastic Four kind of going on a family vacation for Christmas, visiting some of Reed's cousins over in some kind of European village, some small town that's like this idyllic, just small, cozy kind of hamlet in the middle of Europe somewhere, and all the kids and everyone's having fun getting ready for Christmas. But we find out that this town is not all it seems to be, and there might be some horrible secret in the town. That was a particularly fun issue or two. I thought it was a really great kind of refresher, almost filler issue, kind of gapping some of the major story arcs in this book, but I thought they were really well done, and I actually found that read to be one of the more refreshing issues in this collection. Such a fun one. Another thing I want to say too, this is less of a story arc and more of a story plot thread throughout this book. We have Ben Grimm meeting a new woman, falling in love, and actually proposing marriage. So we have kind of the full arc of this relationship, and I know that this character doesn't exist in modern incarnations of the Fantastic Four, so the whole time I'm just kind of holding my breath seeing what happens to this character to see if that relationship resolves itself within this omnibus, and I will say it does. It's absolutely bookended in this single collection, this single run, but we do get a lot of relational dynamics and growth with the Thing, and I thought that that was a really fun way to showcase this character. Some other plot lines, though, going back to the story that I want to touch on as well. We have Doctor Doom after he's sort of incarcerated after this other big story arc. We have him saying that his master, the man that trained him, is coming to their dimension and it's going to bring a bunch of woe and calamity. And so there's this buildup of who trained Doctor Doom, who is this guy, and I think the character's called the Marquis of Death or something like that. He ends up showing up and just wreaking havoc, particularly for the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom himself. A very creepy character, and I think that storyline was really fun, this idea that someone created Doctor Doom or mentored him and what happens there. I'll let you read more for all the twists and turns with that story arc, but I think that one had a great payoff as well. Such a fun story, and I know toward the end of the actual Millar Hitch run, we do have an annual that deals with Johnny Storm kind of getting a woman pregnant, and there's all these attacks on this unborn baby and this woman. It's a really interesting story as well. I think particularly because the way they characterize Johnny Storm in this book, he's in many ways the most kind of vapid and shallow and superficial I've ever read this character. I know they can kind of play him up like a boyish kind of playboy character a lot, but this is one of the worst incarnations I've seen of that. I think he was really well written, funny, entertaining, but he's so just seemingly shallow in this book. I think in some ways it made him feel more more human and flawed, but I just almost never see him portrayed in this way. And I think in that annual, I believe it was the annual, where he kind of gets this girl pregnant, we actually get to see more of his nobility and more of his sort of heroic nature step up to the forefront. And I think that was a great way to kind of wrap up their run, seeing Johnny be a little bit more. So altogether, some really great storylines in this relatively short Fantastic Four run by Millar and Hitch. The art by Hitch throughout is, again, just spellbinding and wonderful. Some people call it cinematic or widescreen art. There is like a breadth of scope here artistically that is so immersive and does so much for the world building and storytelling. Hitch's character models are generally more realistic and less cartoony looking, which I really favor. I love seeing his work, like I said, in the Ultimates, but seeing him here in Fantastic Four, it's just, again, a great way to revisit this incredible artist, and the art throughout is extremely strong. I do want to make sure I talk about some of the other miniseries we have included in this omnibus, Fantastic Force and Marvel 1985. I'll start first with Fantastic Force, issues 1 through 4. This was written by Joe Ahern and penciled by Steve Kurth and Neil Edwards. I think the art here was really strong as well. I definitely preferred Bryan Hitch's artwork, if I'm honest, but I think the art style was still really consistent. It wasn't too jarring of a transition, which I always appreciate when we get a lot in the omnibus like this. I was pretty immersed. I didn't really feel like I missed a step there. So what the Fantastic Force miniseries really is about, it follows those new Defenders characters, the surviving members after that storyline. So we have like Banner Jr., Alex Ultron, I think is the character's name that I mentioned earlier. We have Psionic, who is the kind of telepathic. We have the Human Torch-like character that kind of can burst into flames whenever he wants. We have the Hooded Man, the future Wolverine, who's almost like a father figure to that Hulk son. Anyway, we have them, maybe a few more I'm missing, but the new Defenders kind of decide after they lose their Sue Storm, and now that they're sort of their own thing within New World, they decide to give themselves a new name, and they decide on Fantastic Force. So this is a superhero fighting team from the future who is now back in the present, and they end up getting kind of trapped in New World. So they're sort of the heroes of that new world. And that's really where this series is set. They have all their own drama where you find out that the kind of orchestrator of New World, the person that was married to Reed's ex-girlfriend Alyssa in the first storyline, has kind of gone full dark side baddie. He kind of says that this was made for the elite, and it wasn't made for everyone from the future, and he basically wants to destroy him and kind of purge New World so that it can be again for the rich and the elite. And so the Fantastic Force is basically defending all the populace from the future that they gave up so much to try to save in the first place. And that's really the dynamic of this book. I think it was a really fun 4-issue miniseries. There are a ton of great X-Men sort of crossover moments. We have sort of incarnations of Jean Grey and Wanda Maximoff and all of these other characters that sort of find their way into this book, if it's really them or some version of them. At any rate, it was a really fun miniseries. I think it was really well paced, and frankly, by the end of that 4-issue miniseries, I wanted to read more. I was thinking if there was an epic collection or an omnibus for more of this world, I would keep reading these characters. I think the concept and setup were great. It was a fantastic ensemble cast, but I think the 4-issue mini was a ton of fun. I'm so happy they include it. Like I said, it really just stars those characters introduced by the Millar Hitch run. At least in that formation, and I think that was just a strong addition to this omnibus that made it feel a bit more full. Transitioning over to Marvel 1985, that 6-issue series was written again by Mark Millar, but illustrated by Tommy Lee Edwards. And I will say the art from Edwards is absolutely spellbinding. I do maybe still prefer Bryan Hitch, but I don't know. Edwards' art is really, really beautiful. It's a little bit of a different style, but I think it fit the piece perfectly. And wow, I have a lot to say about this. So what Marvel 1985 is essentially about, it's a story set in 1985, presumably in our world, and it stars, I think, an 11-year-old or kind of a preteen boy who his parents have gone through a divorce. His mom has kind of remarried or in a serious relationship with this guy, and his dad is sort of a layabout guy who doesn't really have a lot of ambition or drive, a really sweethearted, good-natured guy, a great dad, but he just doesn't really have the drive to really make more of his life. And at any rate, this teen is really, or preteen, he's really caught up in the world of Marvel Comics. He just loves them, but he's kind of a social outcast within his already small friend group, and he's really navigating some of these hard issues, the fracturing of his family kind of paradigm. And within all of this, he goes with his dad when his dad has custody on a walk through the woods in their town, and they go to this old house that used to belong to a friend of his dad's. And we find out that this house is presumably being renovated into an old folks home. And the guy who's there renovating, kind of the property owner, says, well, hey, kid, if you like comic books, there's a bunch here that tenants have left in these boxes. And they're all the classic origin, first appearance, key issues from Marvel Comics up to this time. The kid is just floored, but he says, oh, I can't take these, like they're worth so much more. Anyway, it's this nice little exchange, but then the kid looks up in the window as the dad's talking to this guy, and in the window he sees the Red Skull, the Captain America villain, this nefarious Marvel supervillain, or at least someone looking like him. He's totally floored and kind of horrified, goes home, tells his buddy, no one believes him. From there, it gets a little bit weirder. He investigates more, and this time he sees characters like Doctor Doom and the Hulk and the Mole Man and all of these different Marvel characters. And eventually more and more break through, and we find out that for whatever reason, a bunch of supervillains from the Marvel Universe have escaped that universe and are now trying to take over this universe, because they've justified that this universe is unprotected by superheroes. And because this kid is the only person that sees this threat at first, he really is trying to alert everyone, but ultimately people start finding out because these supervillains start wreaking havoc on the town. We have kind of the cops and military kind of called in, but at that point it's almost too late. We have Galactus showing up. It gets really hectic. The boy tries to find the portal to the Marvel Universe, which he finds to kind of try to recruit the Avengers, all of the superheroes from the Marvel Universe, to come to his to save the day. And we have the dad finally stepping up. We realize that all of this is due to his childhood friend, who might be this world's only real mutant. It's a really fascinating story. I'll let you read it on your own to see the wrap-up, but a really fascinating story that again has very little, if anything, to do with the Fantastic Four, but it was written by Mark Millar, and there were Fantastic Four characters in it, so I guess that was close enough. At any rate, a great addition to the book. After that, we have a handful of extras, some great art, sketches, production materials, a lot actually having to do with Marvel 1985, interestingly enough, but a great handful of extras for a really great book. I actually really loved this run on Fantastic Four. It's really becoming one of my favorite modern Fantastic Four books. Definitely gets a recommendation from me. And in fact, as we finish, I think all that's left is to give this book a grade. For some really fun science fiction, fantasy, superheroic adventures illustrated by one of the premier artists in comic books, The Comic Book Report has to give Fantastic Four by Mark Millar and Bryan Hitch Omnibus an A-. I think that this was a great book, a definite must-read for Fantastic Four fans out there, and still a high recommend for general comic book fans. I think that this is a great place to start Fantastic Four if you're looking for a modern run that doesn't need a ton of background or history. There are a lot of really fun storylines. It's not the biggest omnibus out there, so it could be a quicker read for those interested. And the fact that we have all of these bonus stories like the Fantastic Four and Marvel 1985, there's just a real lot to love with this book. Definitely recommend checking it out, but I'd also love to know what you all think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a ton of fun. If you liked the video, definitely give it a thumbs up. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please consider leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel, and maybe checking out some of my other videos. Have a good one.